watching Cafecito Chat con Betsaida LeBron. I'm Betsaida, and you are about to watch the recorded version of the interview that happened at the last Cafecito Chat. And as a reminder, this is only one part of what happens at Cafecito Chat. There's the interview, and then there's the conversation that happens live in the Zoom room. So if you want to be part of the action, you gotta be live in the Zoom. But for now, enjoy the recorded interview. Enjoy the episode. I am the host of Cafecito Chat. So bienvenidos todos a Cafecito Chat. I also serve as the EVP of Professional Development for the Greater Sacramento Chapter of ALPFA. Besides that, I'm also a storytelling strategist and a professional learning and development. That's what I do. So really what's important to me is bringing people together, sharing stories and learning together. And so that is really what inspired creating this space, Cafecito Chat, is so that we can come together, so that we can grow, right? This vibrant community of storytellers, dreamers, change makers. And so every month we invite you to these kind of intimate, heartfelt conversations. So I have some truly remarkable guests every month, excuse me. This month is April. We'll introduce you in just a second. But the point of kind of coming together is to learn a little bit more about, who we are. And so we're sharing personal stories, professional highlights, right? These stories of who we are and what makes us who we are. This is not just a, business as usual type conversation or podcast. We really are trying to kind of peel back the layers and get to know, like, who we are and what does it mean, especially as Latinos who happen to be in workspaces, right? What does that mean for us? And so this format for Cafecito Chat is unique and special in that the first part is a recorded, basically like a podcast, right? So you're going to hear the conversation is going to be kind of a back and forth with April and I, or whoever the guest is. And that'll be the first 25 minutes or so. And then after that, our conversation, I hope, will then inspire a bigger conversation. And at that point, we'll turn off the recording. And then the rest of the conversation is off the record. And it's just for us who are here in the Zoom room. So the goal is to get to know, who's in the room and then inspired by these conversations. So know that at that point, I'll let you know, you can unmute, you can turn on your camera, and that will not be put on the YouTube or on any of the social media. That's just for us. And so if you're watching this later and you're like, oh, that sounds incredible, I'm so inspired by the conversation y'all are having, and you're like, I also want to be in that conversation, well, you got to be live in the Zoom room. So for folks who are like, next time, yeah, absolutely. Next time, be here live so that you can also be part of the conversation. We would love to have you. And the last thing I want to say about like why we chose the title Cafecito Chat, well, because in Latino culture, cafecito, it represents much more than just coffee, right? It's a cherished tradition that embodies connection, community, and just authentic conversation. So just like families and friends gather around the kitchen table to share cafecito and stories and laughter and, chisme, right? That's just a way to create this kind of warm, connecting space that we're all given an opportunity to just take a breath and slow down, right? And just truly connect. So this is why this is not a coffee chat, right? A coffee chat's a very different energy. This is a cafecito chat. It should feel like we're con familia and enjoying these little moments where every voice matters and every story is important. And it's it's not just an interview show. I hope that it feels like it's a little space that's a home away from home where you can take a break, get replenished, right? Find what it is that you need, and then finish out the day. So, thank you so much for being here, for joining us. And I'm going to introduce uh, my guest. So April Lugo, and I was connected to you through one of our board members, Rico, and I would just love for you to share a little bit about yourself, and yeah, who you are, and then we'll kind of get into the conversation of yeah for today.
Oh yeah, no, I'd love to. My name's April Lugo. I see there's another April Lugo on the call, so we'll have to circle back to that because I have never met another April Lugo, so that's interesting. I am from Pennsylvania, but my family's from Puerto Rico, from Carolina, and I have been in Maryland for the last 10 years now. That feels too long. Came here to study at Hopkins University and ended up staying here for work. Ended up in the HR space. I'm a senior manager in the HR space, and then also the president of ALPFA Baltimore Chapter.
Amazing. Yes, that's right. 'Cause you were with Alpha, the president of Baltimore, and I yeah, Baltimore's such a cool place. What's one of your favorite things about? Yeah, we got some Baltimore fans. Great.
My favorite things about Baltimore, honestly, I think it's the community I found here. Not just through Alpha, but just in general. Like I found such close friends, such close people that have now become my family, and it's hard to leave them behind, which I think is what keeps me here.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, and also yeah, for folks who are joining us from all over, curious where you're from. So, I'm in the Greater Sacramento area chapter in California, right? You're in Baltimore and Maryland. So, yeah, and what's been kind of great about just these spaces is that we get folks joining from all over that are connected to Alpha or maybe aren't connected to Alpha. Um, but so Alpha being, right, the Association for Latino Professionals for America, we are very, and that's just not just the US, right? So we have all over the place. Um, One of the things that I really loved in our first conversations where we were kind of just chatting about like what is it the conversation wanted to have was just talking about yeah that intersection of being Latino as a professional and how it's in a lot of ways is a very unique experience that isn't um that it's different, and it also has like a lot of different flavors to be a professional Latino, and we were kind of chatting about that. And so, as in your position and kind of being in HR, what kinds of things have you seen? Just kind of, yeah, what does that mean for you, or what does it mean personally for you to be Latina in professional spaces?
Yeah, I had this conversation a lot, I think, in my career and in life and with friends. When I started my career, I'm first generation in the States, first generation to college, and first generation into the corporate world. And I found it to be so shocking to see how things operated so differently than being at home. And I really struggled with my identity because I think and I maybe for everyone kind of feels this way, when you graduate, you start the workforce as a young adult, you have no idea who you are. You don't know who you want to be. You're trying to figure it out. You're trying on different hats, different shoes, different ties, different glasses to try to figure out what feels comfortable to you. And then in that same space, even with my Latina identity, I struggled with it because my family's from Puerto Rico, so I grew up with them calling me the white one because I was the first one born in the States. And so because I didn't grow up the way they did, they saw me so differently and really Americanized. And so how much of my identity was I able to claim being someone born in the States? And being that my Spanish wasn't as clean as their Spanish is, right? Like they make fun of my white accent. And so I think about how much of that identity mix was such a struggle for me. And then when I went into the corporate space, all of my colleagues only saw me as Latina. So here I am battling with my identity at home and then going to work when I'm getting asked every Latino question there is. Hey, we have a Latino patient come in. Can you help us figure that piece out? Or we have to translate this document. And then I'm thinking, oh, my Spanish is not that great. Maybe I shouldn't be, in these rooms and in these spaces. And all of that is to say is, I think for us, the first step is figuring out who we are and what matters to us and how we want to live in our world and in our skin. And then after that, figuring out what that self looks like in the corporate space. But I think what's really scary for a lot of Latinos, Latinas in the workplace is while you're having this huge identity crisis with yourself, there's this American corporate culture that's pushing you to conform and doesn't really give you that flexibility to find out how you feel and like who you want to be.
Yeah. Yeah, and then it feels, thinking of my experience too, it just like the urgency of kind of like jumping in and just being a part of, that corporate culture, because standing out is, or like not being, not knowing the right way to kind of be to have the right lingo or like, to communicate, like you don't want anyone to feel like you don't belong in that space. So there is like a lot of pressure, absolutely, to find yourself.
Mhm.
How do you suggest for folks, or because I know, and you were mentioning even having folks that you mentor, how do you get them to start thinking about how to find themselves? Like, what do you suggest, or what has worked for you or folks you know?
The way I did it, and this is, I'm super type A and data driven, so I'm sure this is not everyone's journey. But I ended up talking to people in my life that were important to me, my family, my close friends, people who mentored me, and asked them what they thought my values were, which is interesting, right? Like, in lieu of trying to solve it myself, like, I'm like, what do you think is important to me? Interestingly enough, everyone said exactly the same thing. You're very direct. You really care about your family. You really care about community. Honesty is very important to you. These are the things that you struggle with, right? So all of the, like, my weaknesses, my strengths, my focus areas were all kind of the same. And then when I reflected on it, I realized those are the things that were a priority to me and that I was unwilling to change. And so for me, for example, family is super important. There's nothing I'm ever going to put over my family. And I'll even give this example. There was a huge event happening in Pennsylvania. I was actually visiting my parents for my sister's school play 45 minutes away. And I'm getting text messages like, you should come out. There's so much opportunity. There's so many people here. And I'm like, no, I'm going to go to IHOP with my sister. And I'm going to go celebrate her being fish number 3 in this play. And even though fish number 3 to you might not be important, but to her, she's always going to remember the time her sister drove 4 hours to see her be fish number 3 and bought flowers and a photo so she could sign it. But I'm not going to remember this event, this random event 6 years from now.
Yeah, yeah. That's so interesting, the idea of like going to other people and ask them to tell you who you are. Why do you think like that was, why were they so clear about it?
I think your core self is so visible and we can't see it because we're so caught up in our own drama, right? Like we're in our own plot, in our own minds, and all the questions and insecurities that really your true self kind of always shows. Nothing in the dark doesn't come to light. And when you spend enough time with someone, you start to realize who they are, even when they don't realize it. Even thinking about like when you're young, remember like your friend likes the boy and you're like, oh, I know who you have a crush on, but they didn't know they had a crush on them yet, but you knew.
Yes, this is true because yeah, we're real sneaky sometimes to ourselves. We think we're hiding it, and it's so obvious to everybody else. Yeah, yeah. I love that. I think that's such a helpful thing to think about. Yeah, how other people can really help us to understand. And then from there, you figure out, like, okay, if that's who I am and I agree with that, then what are my priorities and how do I want to make sense of that? So, I mean, and I don't think this is unique to, Latinos in the workplace. I think this is a thing that happens for everybody, where work will let you give up everything, your identity and your culture, to assimilate into the machine that is work. Um, and so I do think like that's so true, that having our own sense of identity is what's going to help us kind of create these boundaries of what is acceptable to us. But that can also be really scary. And I think about, for folks who are just kind of maybe don't quite have that confidence to have that clarity. What comes up for you when thinking about like how to support folks like that?
When they're not sure how to when they're not sure how to keep their authentic selves in the workplace when they're asked to conform. Is that the question?
I think a part of it, I think that's one piece. And then I think the other piece is like, because the work will just take, well, it is beneficial. How am I going to say this? It seems that as I talk to people and as I've been in different spaces, is that, what is that saying, that it's like the nail that sticks out gets hammered,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so there is that intimidation of being the nail that's sticking out, right? So whether that's me being because of, my culture, because of whatever my expression, because of whatever the thing is, like if I stick out, I might be the one to get a little more
Mm.
focus. And if I'm pretty brand new or maybe don't have the confidence in certain spaces, what would you say to folks like that? And I don't know that we're always conscious of that, but like you said, sometimes we don't see what's in front of us or what's why we're doing the things, but I can kind of see that it is a fear of sticking out.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's being clear on your why. And I come back to knowing who you are and what you stand for. Back to my example of asking people around you what they believe your values are. Sometimes the stuff they say doesn't align with who you want to be. And so if someone comes to you and says, what I've noticed is that you put your job before everybody else, and you're like, that's not what I want my brand to be or what I actually value, you've lost a portion of yourself if you don't align to what that brand has become. And I think it's being really clear in your why, because again, if you don't know who you are and what you want and why you want it, it's really easy to get caught in this hurricane of culture around you and conform to it. And I think even in terms of feedback, right? Like I have gotten so much conflicting feedback in my career. You're too loud. You're not loud enough. You're too tall. You're not tall enough, right? Like it's like, what are we trying to get to? And both of those statements can't be true all the time. Like, and I think for women too, like you'll hear at the same time you're being too aggressive, but you're being too quiet. And so you're like, how do I tone it up and tone it down at the same time? And so for us, if we're not clear in that piece of ourselves, and there's all these voices in our head, we're just going to keep switching and switching and switching and not be able to perform. I do think the nail that sticks out gets hammered, but I also think that those who stick out with authenticity and clarity get recognized because you're something that's different from everyone else and you do bring a different value. But I think when we don't know what we value and that hammer comes down, we weaken ourselves and shrink ourselves, and that negatively impacts our brand and how we show up.
Yeah, and I like that distinction of, when you do it with authenticity. And I also think, you make me think that sometimes not every space is meant for us, right? And so sometimes that feeling of, oh, I have to fit this thing, may be because that space isn't for you. Um, and so yeah, knowing that and knowing how to like kind of navigate with that, I think is also really important. I love what you said about getting the conflicting feedback because I have also that happens, Um, I always try to remind myself that like feedback isn't really about me. It's always about the person giving the feedback. Cause right, like the person who's saying that you're too loud is probably because that's like something that they're seeing that they want for themselves, or they're like, this is how I show up and this is how I'm successful, right? Or the person who's saying like, you should be maybe not so loud is again, they're just trying to show you what they've learned, but doesn't mean that that's right for you either.
Oh yeah, one of the weirdest pieces of feedback I ever received was I laugh like a little girl. And I was like, what can I do about that? Like, what can I do about the way I laugh, the sound of my laughter? And then I kept, every time I laughed, I kept thinking about the way I laughed, which was like, ruined all my laughter for like 2 months. And I think those pieces is like what is valuable, because some things are valuable, right? Like some feedback I've received, I definitely am glad I received it. And there's things that we associate as being critical to our identity that isn't, right? Like we're like, I love sweatpants. I, for a long time, not joking, thought sweatpants was a critical part of my identity. I was like, this is how I grew up. They're trying to take my sweatpants from me. They don't want to respect me. I'm super smart. I shouldn't have to give up my sweatpants to prove I'm super smart. That's such a silly thing and was in no way, shape, or form part of my identity. So being able to have the wisdom to differentiate what's core for your values and then dismiss things that just don't align to what you believe in, like your laugh is too childlike. I'm sorry that you're so grumpy.
Right. No, and that's so yeah, it's in the comments. Yeah, your laugh, like that's so dumb for them to even have that comment. 100%. Like absolutely. And again, like so much of sometimes what people are saying is nothing to do with us. It's like their stuff. And you're right. They're probably just like, oh, how dare you have joy? Because I don't have any. And yeah, that's that's a while.
Yeah.
what did you say? Do you remember your
I said, I don't
response
know
to
what you
that?
want me to do with that. They sat me, they literally, it was a senior leader on my team, not even like a random person.
Oh,
They sat me down in a room and said, I want to have a very serious conversation so you can be more effective in your position. I just found that your laugh is very childlike and it just makes you seem not as respectable. And I laughed.
that's the
And we
appropriate
laughed.
reaction. Yeah, because like, what do you want me to do? Like, this is who I am.
And I'm
Yeah,
like, this is a crazy conversation. I'm like, what do we do with this?
yeah, yeah. And I think, it is such a thing to find and practice ways to kind of like be comfortable showing up and being yourself and like having the freedom and the joy to laugh is you being able to bring your full self to what you're doing. And so, yeah, I think that I don't think it's always like easy, but it feels like it's absolutely worthwhile when you can find a way to do it. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Anything else that you want to kind of add just about like this in the vein of kind of just like finding ways to kind of lean into your, you know, bringing yourself and I think also just like um small ways in which like you personally like honor your, heritage and your personality to bring to like the work that you're doing and I know you work different places but just in general or even if with alpha.
Yeah, I think for me, and I know everyone's different, so I try to. I'm speaking from a place that has just been my learned experience and lived experience. I don't want to get to the top and not recognize myself.
Hmm.
And one of the things for me, and we were talking about this before the call started, I have significantly younger siblings, and so my sister, she's 16 years old, and she's looking at schools right now, going to apply in September. And one of the things I think about a lot is I know I'm someone she looks up to. I'm the first in my family to get a 4-year degree. And she really admires the accomplishments I've gotten to in life. And I want to be able to look at her and say, I didn't lose my soul to get here because I don't want her to give up all the amazing things that make her her. Like my sister's super quirky and she's super outspoken and she loves to dance and she loves to sing and she doesn't need a stranger. Everyone's her best friend. She has more friends than there are numbers. And so that to me is a huge motivation to get there being myself because I want her to keep herself when she gets there. And how do I look her in the eyes and say, you can be this only if you shave every core part of your personality down to get there? And so I think that's been a huge motivator. But I recognize that not everyone is in that position. I think it's a huge privilege to say, I'm unwilling to change these things about me to get ahead because I think there are a big financial needs for a lot of people. Some people are supporting their parents' retirement or they have cancer diagnoses that they're paying medical bills for and they have to sacrifice whatever it takes for them to get there. And I have a lot of sympathy for those people. But for myself, and I'm privileged in a space of privilege to do those kinds of things. I want to get there and recognize who I am. And I also want other people coming behind me, not just my sister, but other Latinos and Latinas to say, okay, this person is quirky and she's a little weird. And she still was able to become successful by being her authentic self. I can do that too. And what does that really look like? And I think in the corporate space, it's very Americanized. And as Latinos, we're pushed to conform to this American norm of working. And if you want to hug someone, you feel like you can, or you want to be a little loud or laugh a little too much, right? You feel like you have to quiet all the pieces of you that are so great. And I think for us, as we take in these leadership roles and people are watching us, like people are watching me constantly. The amount of times that people speak, telling me stuff that I don't even know how they know that thing about me, right? And they're watching because they have ambition of being you. And I think it's important when people receive so many blessings in life to be someone that people can respect and say, oh, I can be myself too.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I think the important piece is, and I always try to remember this, in a lot of different ways, but when we show up authentically, it's not just for us, it's also we are then the giving permission for everyone around us and even the ripple effect of those who are maybe who weren't there firsthand, but giving them all permission to also be themselves. Um, And I think the more that more of us find ways to do that, the more that it becomes the norm. So, yeah, yeah. I'm going to end our conversation there. Thank you so much. We're going to keep the conversation going, but we're just going to invite everyone to join us in the conversation. So I'm going to just take a second and say bye to those who are on the recording, but not everybody in the Zoom room. Y'all can stay because we're going to continue with the conversation. Just going to stop the recording.